Hello, everyone. Welcome to Learnit's first virtual event. My name is Lori and I'm Learnit's Chief Global Content Officer. Our mission at Learnit is simple. It's to support the meaningful conversations that education leaders want and need to have to make change happen. And we do this through our in-person event, which will be held next 19th through 21st of January in London. And we now do it through virtual events like this one. Today's session is Notes from the Epicentres, Global Frontline K-12 Leaders Pioneering a New Normal. And we have an amazing panel set up for you today, featuring school leaders from Wuhan, Milan, and New York, as well as the former Minister of Education from South Korea, who's been working with the International Education Commission on reshaping the role of the global teacher workforce. Few notes on format. We'll have 45 minutes of moderated discussion focused on what has and hasn't worked and the very important question of what's next. And then we'll open up the floor to some questions from our audience in the last 15 minutes. And with that, I'll turn it over to our fantastic moderator, senior reporter from Quartz, Jenny Anderson. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Lori. I'm very excited to be here and I don't want to waste any time. We want to focus today on how we're making sure kids are okay today. And by that, I mean their well-being and their engagement and their learning at this unprecedented moment, and how this massive experiment in online learning will change how learning happens in classrooms, in schools, and in countries moving forward. So we really want to take a future view, lessons that we're learning in this moment and how that's going to change things. Ian, I'm going to start with Ian, who is the principal of the International School of Monza in Northern Italy. Ian was informed that his school would close on a Sunday. By Tuesday, he had moved the entire school online. He has reflected to me that he moved very quickly. The team moved very quickly from giving the kids a lot to do and a lot of content to student well-being. So this adrenaline of the first few weeks wore off, well-being shot to the top of the agenda. Ian, what strategies have you developed to manage well-being? And what do you think is going to change with what you've learned through this experience about the importance of it, as with teaching, with learning, with assessment, all of that? How do you carry that forward?
So, and thanks, Jenny, for kicking off with a question about well-being. I think that should be at the top of the agenda. So I'm pleased that we're starting with that. And I think the biggest challenge that we've soon realized a week or two into running a remote learning school was that suddenly a lot of students have the potential to start slipping through the net, not seeing them face to face, not seeing what their expression is, how they're waking up in the morning and that kind of thing. And so systems had to be put in place to make sure that there was also a space for them. One of my colleagues was instrumental in really leading that and making sure that every student had a digital space they could come into at any point in time and speak to some key people in the school about how they were doing. Particularly, some of the quiet ones in a virtual classroom, you may not notice them so much, and so that constant checking in is really, really important. As is the need for gathering feedback from students on a really regular, ongoing basis, and to really try to track as a school community as a whole how are things going, because you just don't get that vibe as you would perhaps in person. Turning to the part of your question in terms of, okay, so what's this learning brought for us thus far, and what might it bring in the future? To be honest, these are systems that we've put in place that I don't see any reason not to keep them when we do go back to school. I think they have enhanced the well-being provision, creating space for children to come into in a very reserved manner. And so my view on that would be very much to continue what we've put in place within the space of a short period of time.
Thank you, Ian. David, I'd love to turn to you. David Newman is the principal of Brooklyn Technical High School, the largest specialized public high school for STEM. in the US. He has 6,000 students. I feel like you are running a small city state. How did you get those 6,000 students and teachers online, connected in meaningful ways? And what has that meant for you as a leader? How have you had to change your own leadership to get that scale online and learning?
Yeah, I mean, like Ian said, while you were reflecting on Ian's transition to remote learning, similar for us, it was announced that schools were closing. They gave kids 3 days off of school, called them snow days over here, and then we got 3 days to train our teachers, and that was it. And so it was very piecemeal. It wasn't training like bringing in professionals, and it was in-house training. We did the best we could, and we hit the ground running. And it was a learning curve for a lot of our teachers. Some were already doing a lot of this stuff, some were not. I have 300 teachers that are all of varying ed tech levels. So to get everybody on board, students, we had issues with them as well. Not having devices at home, sharing devices with parents, with other siblings, wrestling for times when they could have the device versus other people needed the device. Every laptop I had in my school, I had students come in who needed them to just sign them out. And so I gave away basically all the computers that we have to students. The city then picked up the slack on that. So students who still didn't have devices, the city bought them directly for them, and they came in and they picked them up directly from Central. Are there still kids, a little bit lost in the mix? I think that's what I worry about, especially in a school of 6,000 kids. Even though I'm up to about 97% attendance, meaning students are engaging in their classes, still 3% is a large number. And then we're following through, and we're seeking, something Ian also reflect on that, seeing their faces and seeing when kids are in despair. We're used to that. We're used to seeing when something's off and then seeking them out based on that, or them coming and seeking guidance from us. Now it's all about engagement. If you've fallen a little bit off the grid for a few days, that's the only way we can know to seek you out to see if everything's okay. And I guess I have fears that students are doing work, but everything's not okay. And we don't know that, And so there was some issues. Talk about leadership style. It's pretty much culture shock to have a building that has 500 adults that work in it, 6,000 students, and then used to being able, the hustle and bustle of that, being able to walk down the hallway and see thousands of people, and now running a school this enormous from my basement is pretty interesting. I used to say I ran a school utilizing out-of-the-box thinking while still being in the box. The box being the constraints that the city and the state puts on us. We're still a public school, although we are a largely gifted school. Now the box has been lifted, no state exams, possibly citywide change to grading structures and policies, maybe no teacher evaluations for the year our city is talking about. So the box has really somewhat be lifted, but funny enough, I always wanted the box to be lifted, and now I'm longing for the box to be put back on. I normally give teachers vast autonomy with how their pedagogical practices, even with curriculum. It's one of the main reasons that teachers want to come work at our school, for this vast autonomy and the great students we have, of course. But now I find myself being, I don't want to say dictatorial, but I find myself making more rules. I came out with this policy guidelines of remote instruction at Brooklyn Technical High School, and then we've had some revisions, and they're very specific things that you can and can't do. And I've made these around the needs of kids. So there's reasons to do this, but the teachers see it as constraining, right? And that's not really who I am as a leader, but it's sort of how I've had to be to respond to student needs and how they're learning in this situation. Really, I feel disconnected. I feel really disconnected. I find that Meetings that I have more cabinet meetings. I have 15 assistant principals. I find that I have more meetings with them almost daily, where we used to have meetings weekly. I have faculty meetings more often just to check in with faculty, but a meeting with 300 teachers at one time is, it doesn't always work so well. I tap into students, SGO meetings every week, but it's not enough. There's something that is in a dynamic building such as ours, as many of our schools have. This is doing a poor way of replicating that dynamic, and everything from after school activities, which blends into social emotional learning, which are such important things that happen in schools that are not really happening holistically now. We have to really find ways to get that back.
Can I just tag
so
on
I think that
leadership style as well, because what you said there really kind of struck a chord with me in terms of I found myself right from the Sunday evening that Jenny referred to, leading in a completely different way, without wanting to. But you sort of almost becoming more dictating things a bit more, and I found the same. But I feel the reason for that wasn't so much because of the need to set down rules necessarily, but it was because of the need for speed and to getting up and running really, really quickly, and a more diplomatic approach, if you like, perhaps wouldn't have allowed for that.
Well, and I think there's the human need right now. There's so much uncertainty that we're all looking for certainty, certainly for our children, right? So we want to see that certainty. I'd love to turn to Erika, if I could. Erika, actually, she's the principal of the Wuhan Yangtze International School, but she's also getting a PhD in educational technology. Is that right? And
yes,
I'd love to just hear. Fantastic. So, I mean, one of the things that struck me in our conversation, Erika, 24% of Erika's students remained in Wuhan, and the rest were gone. And correct me if I'm wrong. So you had particular challenges around reaching children in multiple time zones.
Correct.
So has the technology lived up to the challenge? I guess I'd love for you to dig into the technology question. Where has it worked? Where has it not worked? In that particular challenge of connecting people in multiple time zones. I mean, David had this massive student body, but you had people literally all over the world. And how have you seen teacher mindset around technology change? I'd love for you to maybe jump on those.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, David spoke to this sense of this box, and the box that he was working in, and the sense that he wanted to be a box, but it was a different kind of box. And I think for us, looking at what we were used to doing with technology, or the way that we were used to running teaching and learning, was no longer possible, especially teaching from across 4 different time zones. We had students that experienced quarantine situations. And so from a socio-emotional perspective, as Ian spoke to, in many ways, they were dealing with their own family crises. They were in transition. They were unable really to continue with this same pace type content. And of course, the benefit of technology is they're able to do what they can on phones, maybe one device that they're sharing across multiple children in the family. But a challenge, as some of the others spoke to, is even the sense of how do we get the same kind of connection that we're used to, the connection that you have around the lunch table, in the hallway. And teachers, I think in school leaders, I've asked this, these questions of, are we doing enough? What does doing enough, what does doing well in this context look like for us? And one of our teachers kind of came with these simple questions. She would ask herself every day, every week, okay, well, am I communicating with my students, even if that looks different? Am my students learning one new thing each day? And am I actively caring for them? If she could answer those questions were yes, then she's like, yes, then I'm enough. While learning and sharing with new technology platforms. In terms of the adjustments that would make, I mean, to your question, Jenny, on has the technology worked for us? I think it's very iterative as we make adjustments. and recognizing the shift in what learning looks like, the shift in what learning means, using a learning network, the communities where students can learn where they are in their new environment, which is very different than the traditional in-classroom experience. So teachers have explored, for example, using gaming techniques. So students will log on from different time zones and they can play this game where they hop around on various islands, and that incorporates social studies, English, sometimes science. And users are able to follow using analytics with specific groups to give more practice where necessary. And then they're finding that students are motivated because they can earn points, they can increase their powers. So that's worked very well, that kind of example. But other times, like we've described already, as David noted, the challenges of disconnection, where a student may not be engaged for a number of days, but you don't know. You don't know if they're still following you. And so just that distance, being able to still experience that school community that we're used to is a challenge.
Right. And Erika, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind to go to audio, because your connection is pretty unstable. Would you mind doing that? Because I think it might help improve, because I didn't sort of hear anything on the teacher mindset thing, and that is going to really feed into where we go with Juho. So very quickly, everyone has said the teachers that they were dealing with had varying levels of sort of ability and affection for ed tech. Have you seen, now that everybody has to do it and everybody kind of has a chance to fail and give it a go, are you seeing a change in mindset? Are teachers more open to it now?
Yeah, you know that the idea model of learning is maybe the mix between high touch and high tech. You need more connections between teachers and students, and at the same, you really need to use more high tech tools in learning. So this sudden surge in online learning may be a good opportunity to use more online edutech tools. For example, in Korea, although Korea is the first country to introduce a network and home with the smartphone world-class smartphone producers, but our classroom is not really open to the new technologies. But after the pandemic, suddenly all teachers are required to teach students online. That provide many teachers to have their first lifetime experience in teaching online to students. This is really a very rare opportunity that no minister or no principal can force teachers to do. You know that, but suddenly all teachers are forced to provide learning opportunity online. This could be a big opportunity for the whole education system in Korea, for example. I heard that teachers today are really leading teachers who already have used online technologies. Teachers in many have never used online technologies before pandemic. So this is really the opportunity for global community to embrace new education technology. So that's the point I want to raise. I agree that it should be combined with human connections. I have a full agreement with the teachers today talking about their concerns of lack of human connections in the pandemic. But app can turn crisis to an opportunity.
So I'm going to do my best. My connection
Yeah,
with
and I
you
would love
broke
to
up quite a bit in there, but so sorry. Do you want to join in? Do you want to pitch in on that, Erika?
I'd love to add on. Yes, please.
Please.
Yes, well, love what you said, Juho, about the sense that teachers. Here, let's try.
There we go.
Let's try that if you can hear me more clearly.
That's actually better. Yeah,
Great.
and Juho, you might do the same. Your connection was very unstable, so maybe just audio. Could we try that?
Great. So
go ahead, Erika.
I appreciate what he said.
Oh yeah.
The uncertainty, the challenge of this time, while it can be difficult and the shock of the school closures and the social distancing, it can be very paralyzing for our staff and our students, but it does push people in their thinking toward a new way of teaching and learning. And that's an important aspect that we can capitalize on moving forward, learning to recognize and then address where we may have been stuck in our thinking before. And one of the things that comes to mind with cognitive bias, the ambiguity effect, looking at when we make decisions, we don't want to make decisions in the direction of an unknown. But now there's so much that's unknown. We have to take steps in that direction. And so that pushes our teachers and really all of our teams into experimentation, maybe using their teacher networks in new ways. And we can consider, how do we use these tools for targeted purposes? And maybe no longer it's just the teacher that was your technology innovator, but really pushing schools and districts to consider how let's not just presume that we should go back to what we did before, but to continue to move forward, to generate new knowledge using the tools that we're using now, and to scale those even more so. So I think even more so than the technology tools themselves is really a change in the teacher mindset, the teacher thinking from this time that will be important as we move forward after this season.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the things that I think is bringing hope from all of this experience more than anything else for me is that power of how professionals and teachers in the community have worked together. Now, on this occasion, it was our hand was forced, if you like. The common learning need that we all had was based on technology and technologies for teaching and learning. But the way that flourished in no time at all and continues to flourish, I'm very excited about the opportunity that collaboration between teachers can then bring when we move on to other projects and sharing of expertise.
Let me ask a question about curriculum and content, because all of you have said in some different way that in the beginning it was all about the content, and that's changed. And I'm curious whether that change is giving you bigger insights into, can less be more with respect to your content? Now, I know everybody has different, Regents exams in the future, not this year, but I'm curious whether not just the tools, but as this opportunity to rethink how much content kids need and whether they need it in different ways. What are your reflections on that? David, could I start with you?
I mean, look, a lot of students come back, alumni come back years and years later. We have these big homecoming events. And I always talk to former students who are now doctors, lawyers, whatever, 40 years old, whatever it is, right? And they say things that we all know is true. Like content, for the most part, right? They remember some foundational stuff, but years later, the content is really gone out of their minds. They remember foundational big things. They remember, and we've given them skills on how to think, on how to critically think, on how to engage in argument, how to, but the minutia of content that we hold so dearly to, that we feel is so important in our subjects. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying it doesn't give us unbelievable perspective, but these are the things that over time dissipate. When students come back and talk about their teachers, and they talk about whether they like them, whether they didn't like them, skills that they taught them, asking them to recite a lesson that they taught them, they'd be hard pressed to do that. And so, so I think, and I'm not belittling content whatsoever, and I'm surely a content tiger myself, but we have to see what's important and what sticks and what's meaningful for students' lives and what changes them as individuals, what builds upon them to make them the adults they're going to be. And some of these, other things besides content and some of the social emotional stuff as well is what makes these young people into the fine adults that they're going to be. And so I think just weighing, what's important, it helps to put things a little bit in perspective.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And that's so true. I mean, that's so true, right? You remember how they made you feel. They remember, but, less about sort of the content. And in this particular moment where feelings are so charged and so huge, we're all learning our own lessons. Juho, could I have you weigh in on this question? I mean, Juho is spending a lot of time thinking about how to transform an education workforce to kind of for the 21st century so that it matches the skills that we have and the role of technology in that. But do you see that this is the opportunity, not just for the technology adoption and for teachers' mindset to change, but do you see a role for governments to say, oh my gosh, we're getting the content and the social and emotional balance wrong. We need more of the skills in the social and emotional and less of the content. Do you think that will actually happen? Or is it just going to pass as soon as the moment has passed?
Can you hear me now clearly?
We can.
Yeah, okay, good. You know that this sudden surge in online learning could probably make teachers to realize that the maybe online learning could have quite useful in delivering the contents, knowledge contents. But they also realize, the parents and students would realize that human connections of teachers are very, very important. So this, the pandemic could make teachers, students, and parents to realize that we should be more aggressive in making dividing roles between teachers and edutech. Teachers can focus more on high touch area, while we are embracing edutech to provide the knowledge contents. So maybe this could happen in not everywhere, but maybe in more areas and in more schools. Teachers, parents, and students can turn this crisis into an opportunity.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, will governments listen? That's always the challenging one. I would love to, Erika, could I have you weigh in on that same question? Do you think we'll see a shift towards? Do you think in your own school you'll see a shift to away from as much content, as much sort of curriculum focus? Less is more, maybe.
Well, it has yet to be seen what the impact of this season will have on high stakes testing like the SAT, AP exams, of which I'm sure the parents and students in all of our schools are quite concerned about. Will they have time to prepare for these tests? So some of the culture is still quite test focused, still quite content driven. However, we're also finding that there are practices that meet in the intersection between content and the person of the teacher that Juho was mentioning, and these deep thinking activities. So the practices of journaling, shared reflection, helping students make sense of their experiences, and whether that's the experience of just being under lockdown or whether that's an experience of learning a new math problem, for example, trying to put those together and trying to focus on what are those essential core aspects of the curriculum and how can we process through that along with what's real life right now. And that's a piece that we've been trying to focus on for some time anyways. But I think, if anything, maybe that will reiterate the importance of it in the perspectives of our parents or some of our teachers that, you know, just want to get through it all. But it will be, I think that standardized testing piece is still going to be key. As long as that's still there as a key lever to get into universities, it will still be something that we will need to address moving forward.
And you also just hit on something else that we've got to dive into, and I'd love to hear everybody's perspectives on this, which is the role of parents. So this has been an interesting opportunity. I mean, honestly, if parent appreciation for teachers doesn't rise as a result of this, I don't know what will make it do so. But we do have the role of parents, and I'm curious whether you all have seen the relationship between the school, with your administrators or teachers, and parents change, and what that's teaching you for what you want to carry forward from that for the next stage of online learning, but then for when you get back into your buildings. Is that another opportunity that we can do something with here right now? Ian, can I start with you on that one?
So I don't think, if I think back over the course of several years, we've never done anything which has been so widely appreciated by parents. So we've got a good head start in the sense that, you know, this movement has actually brought a lot of parents on board. It's allowed them to see inside the classroom and see what, in our case, an inquiry-driven program is all about in a national setting, which is anything but inquiry-driven when it comes to education. So that's an interesting paradigm that we have. So yeah, parents very much on board, appreciative of the school. So we've got a wave that we can ride. And some of my colleagues have really picked up on just how close the parent-teacher relationship has become over the course of the last couple of months, and an understanding that, you know, we're both involved in the education of these children, and we need to be moving along the same tracks and in the same direction for the ultimate benefit of the child. So I think there's a lot of newborn respect, both parents towards teachers, but the other way as well, and teachers towards parents, and seeing the situations that they're living in and what they're trying to juggle as well. So what then that goes on to look like and how we really harness that, I'm not sure yet. But the fact that that foundation has been put in place, I think I'm genuinely confident that's going to bring so much good stuff moving forward.
Jenny, can I add on that point?
Please.
Yeah, about the parents' perspective. You know that the parents are increasingly being aware of the usefulness of online learning after the pandemic. So when teachers emphasize the importance of human connections and emotional and social learning, parents tend to keep emphasizing teachers should focus more on test scores and knowledge content and so forth. But after they realize that the usefulness of online learning, and maybe they can rely more on online learning and education technologies in knowledge contents. On the other hand, maybe they can expect teachers maybe to focus more on human connections and mentorings and social and emotional learning and so forth.
That's such an interesting point, Juho. It's an opportunity for them to be reminded of how important it is to their children to have that connection with a teacher. So maybe that physically seeing it for a month at a time will remind them that these tests aren't so paramount. And Ian, I think the trust that you were talking about, so it's laying the foundations, it's really building the trust, and then of course the opportunity, what we do with it will be interesting. David, did you have any reflections on this question of parents and changing relationships?
Yeah. I have a pretty interesting dynamic here going on in my own household. There's like an incubator of education going on here. I'm running the largest school in the United States. I have my wife is a teacher, and I see everything that she's going through. And I will say that it seems like surely hours-wise, she's working harder than she's ever worked. And there's an interesting dynamic there. I have 3 children. The oldest is in high school and the other 2 are in elementary school. Like most parents, my kids are driving me absolutely bonkers. And it's, you know, and it's interacting with my own children and trying to homeschool them in some respect is making me a better educator and a better leader. And I'm seeing what's really, you know, happening and what's really important. And I'm surely mindful of that, the appreciation that people have of school and teachers specifically on what they do, and parents realizing when they're trying to dive into these things with their kids, the educational experience, how frustrating it is for them. And they can only imagine how frustrating it is for us. But that's some dynamic that's really interesting. Parents are engaging in education, their children's education with them on a level that they've never engaged before. Normally in our school, the kids who get good grades, the parents leave them alone. They know what they're doing. They're learning. Everything's working. Parents are going to work. They're tapped into their education on a superficial level as they see great grades keep coming. And now they're really diving into that because they're in their face and they're present and they're diving in. And I think some longing aspect of this is going to be that parents are going to be more engaged in their child's education experiences going forward, regardless of what age level that they got engaged with their children because of this experience. I think that's not going to leave. They're going to get used to tying into it. And as they get better at doing that and get less frustrated as I am, I think they're going to want to tune into that more and more. So I think that's going to be a lasting.
So interesting that what we're talking about with teachers and with parents is kind of melding, right? So a lot of teachers were wary of some ed tech because they had their tried and true methods and because they kind of didn't have to, and they've been forced to do it. Parents, I think a lot of parents are fearful. I'm speaking for myself here. You know, we don't totally know how to be a teacher, but suddenly we've had to be. And it's, of course, we're not particularly good at it, but we're giving it a go. And that's actually helpful, right? And so we've all been forced into this very uncomfortable position. And now, you know, what do we do with it? Erika, did you have any reflections that you'd like to add on with respect to parents? Has the relationship with your teachers and parents changed?
Yes, I was just going to jump in. And one of the things we've been learning that seems in line with the others is the challenge of asking or expecting parents to be teachers, and some of the presumptions that maybe our teachers have had when they send these complicated lesson plans that they understand they would use, but the parents don't know what to do with that. So it's been interesting even to see the family education that has shifted to provide more clarity, which even can look like helping families establish a schedule that can work for them and their various needs, or talking about the age of the child and how much recommended screen time, or when to take a break and when to go do something else. And I think also in the shifting and looking at the future of families as partners, as Ian mentioned, and trying to look at how we can design activities that are off screen that can fit within the natural connections that we would hope that families would have anyways, where they can sit down and talk to each other around the table or go out and play together. And for example, I was reading about conversations about resiliency in this time, which everyone is learning about personally, and how important it is for kids to hear their own family stories about bravery and courage and resiliency, or how grandpa, or how we got over as a family this hard time. And adults as well experience more wellness, being able to share these experiences. So even just what a powerful time. You have to eat dinner every night, right? So to be able to sit down and like that could be something of their online learning, just being able to have this family conversation and for the student to tell about it afterward. So I think really moving forward, I'd love to see more of those kinds of activities coming out of the schools. And we'd love to capitalize on this more of how can we find those natural intersections between the school and the family.
That dinner time,
yeah, I think that's
going to change, right? It's not going to be how was school today. Fine, it's deeper than that going forward, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to your point, Ian, that having laid some of the foundations of trust, there's just a better relationship there. So when you all come to us and say things like, here are a few recommended activities, instead of sort of throwing it in the bin or saying, but we have to talk about all these things, it's like, yeah, we should try this because we know it works and we've seen it. And, it's seeing is believing. So we only have 5 minutes before we go to Q&A. So I'd love to just have you guys, as concisely as possible, address an issue that you've all raised in one way or another, which is this challenge of connection, right? How do you stay connected? Ian, you specifically laid out a few of the strategies that you've used, a digital space where kids can always go. I'm curious if anyone else wants to jump in and talk about how they've created that connection, because what I'm hearing from you all is that that's either with teachers, by the way, connecting to your teachers, or your students, or your teachers and your students, but this idea of how you create human connection in this very virtual world. I think everybody's looking for help on that. Does anyone want to jump in on that?
I mean, it's unbelievably tough. I mean, we started getting clubs going again. So even though our school is notorious for being a pressure cooker content-wise and pedagogically and wise, we have 300 clubs. The clubs are a way of life for us. Teams as well. We have 42 athletic teams. We often win city championships in many sports. So that's all gone. And so we do have clubs. Like the crochet club got itself back together, and they're doing like an online thing, and the mentor is showing them how to crochet, and the kids are crocheting and whatnot. And so we're trying to get more and more clubs back going up again, because we see it's important. I mean, there's a twofold thing going on. They're missing school, and they're not having that interaction at school, but they're also not having interaction with anybody else either. It's not like they're just not going to school. They're also in New York City, not leaving their homes, and so they're losing the aspect when school was over. If they went home and did things with their friends in the neighborhood and whatnot, that's over as well, right? And so so we're in a real isolationist predicament right now in the city. And so just being able to get outside seems refreshing, right? And so yes, I think we're having real issues with that. And we need surely to find ways to have interaction. Look, this online interaction works to some extent, right? And then we are seeing here that students are staying. They're doing these things where they have their parents drive them, and they keep the cars like 20 feet apart, and they're yelling across a parking lot, and that's sort of a little bit more interaction. The human condition and yearning for this real personal interaction. You see people all over the place doing unbelievably innovative things, going out of their way to have contact, and so you see people that are have this virus just driving and staying in their cars and being 30 feet away from their grandkids just to be able to see them, and driving hours just to do that, right? And so finding ways to replace human interaction, in my mind, is unbelievably difficult, if not downright impossible. But these fixes, these types of interaction online, they work to a point. And I guess the hope really is that we could just, get back to school and get back to our regular lives at some point. But, another societal concern that surely I have and a lot of people are talking about, will it ever really be the same? Will interaction be the same? When I see people that I'm fond of after this is all over, people are going to be running to give people hugs after this. Is there going to be like some sort of permanent social distancing that goes on? People wary of what they can contract from other people. I mean, I think there's real concerns about you interacting.
Let me just suggest a different angle of this debate. That let us think about the ideal learning model that could replace the current failing model that is far outdated and rapidly antiquated model, right? So the new model, learning model, should be a judicious mix between online and offline. And we are actually experimenting with a huge surge in online learning. But this is a transient period, and maybe this period can pave the way for the destination of the mix between online and offline. That could be really ideal learning model for every child. So maybe the 100% human connection online learning is impossible, right? So you have to rely on online learning to deliver knowledge contents, and teachers can focus on offline human connections. So this the terrible period could probably give us an opportunity to embrace online technologies. You know that the technologies are already there for years, but classroom doesn't really open up for embracing new technologies. So we embraced these technologies during the outbreak of corona pandemic, and after that, maybe we can combine this online learning experience to explore the ideal learning model with the judicious mix between human connection and education technologies.
Thank you, Juho. That was very helpful. There's this great, he has this Bloom's taxonomy, which I'd love to show you all, but basically understand and remember the bottom of the triangle. That's where we use the high-tech learning, and the apply, analyze, evaluate, create is the high touch. So that seems to fit into what you're talking about. So I'd love to move to questions. We have about 2 billion questions, and I'm noticing some patterns in them. So I'm going to try to combine a few of them so that we've got a lot of listeners, and I know that they've got some queries. So a lot about assessment. So does anybody here want to weigh in on, will assessment change after this? Will we see assessment, formative, summative assessment change in any significant way? Do you anticipate that? Will you lead that effort? Ian, David, Erika, anyone want to jump in?
You know, for us, it's hard. You know, so I lead a school that gives more AP exams than any school in the world. Most commonly, students graduate my school with a year of college under their belt through, you know, college courses and whatnot. It's sort of interwoven in everything we do, and it's a little crazy in the sense of we're such a testing school. And I will point this out, the only way to get into my school is to take an SAT-like exam. And if you get it over a certain grade, you're in. And if you don't, you're not. So that's sort of an interesting dynamic of who our students are. So they are good test takers and they're driven by tests. But it's—
What about formative? What about formative? Because that's something you can control. You can't control some of these outside, but what about your formative, like assessing students as you go? Is this teaching you anything about how you might do that, the role of technology in that?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, with technology, I think the rub on technology, well, I think the interaction with technology for some of our teachers, look, half my teachers have already been using ed tech very well. The other half, I think now that the exposure to this, I don't think it's ever going to leave them. I think it's going to change the dynamic of how they teach going forward. I think as they get more efficient and more versatile with it, and more proficient with it, I think it's going to be, if there's going to be a change in education in the future, I think that's what it's going to be with familiarity with this stuff. Formative assessment, you know, it's a tough question. I think there's such a longing to go back to the way things are, and I think and I think as it goes further, it creates more of this dynamic that maybe things will never go back. I think everybody initially was like, okay, this is going to be temporary and whatnot, but we're seeing, as we've been talking about, insights into the human condition, insights into school and education because of this pandemic that we've never really seen before, from multiple levels, from teacher levels, from principal levels, from parent levels, surely, and even from student levels. And we're sort of taking all this information and trying to find out, you know, even if things go back to normal, how can we better make school experiences for students on every level based on what we've learned from this? And so we're surely taking note of that.
Can I answer the question
Right.
as well, but from a completely different angle? I'll be very quick with this, which is, in terms of the question about formative assessment, what I see more than anything else is that this type of schooling has highlighted perhaps more than ever before the various different needs and inclusion needs within the community. That's really been heavily highlighted, and I think that will then feed forward into how we think about assessing in different ways because of the inclusion needs that have been highlighted.
And what do you mean by inclusion needs? Can you just clarify that? And then Erika, will come to you.
Students who learn in different ways, can express themselves in different ways.
Okay. Erika?
Well, I was going to add, in terms of inclusion, when Ian mentions students expressing themselves in different ways, that's probably the biggest learning or the biggest application of this time, because students are in so many different places, different contexts, even more so diversity of their access to resources. And equity is still a big challenge in our schools anyways, but to look at giving choice options instead of this one size fits all assessment that we maybe tend to fall into. And probably the biggest example of that has been in our early childhood and the struggle to find how do we assess students when we're used to observing them playing or working with one another, just a walk around the classroom, but now we can't do that. So how do we find other ways, whether it's through having parents take pictures of what they're doing or using the simple tools that they may have in their house? Do they have blocks? Do they have plates? Do they have coins? What can we use? And for the teachers to think bigger on how they can apply that lesson, I think is a good push in thinking, although certainly not easy to do.
So that is a perfect segue into another sort of bunch of questions we're getting around equity. So there have been, this virus has sort of cast a very bright light on a lot of equity issues. How are you all addressing these equity issues of connection, of the actual technology itself? And then Erika, you just brought up this idea of choice options, pedagogy and reaching students, everything. How do we see more clearly right now inequities? What are we going to do about it?
So can I just interrupt?
Yes, please.
Online learning, there are four major areas. The first one is network connectivity, right? The second is devices. Third, platforms. Fourth, contents, softwares. In all four areas, the people can have a lot more access to better connectivity, better devices, better platforms, and better softwares. So the government really should focus on providing equal online learning opportunity. This is really the new area that we have been witnessing after coronavirus pandemic, and it's problematic not at the national level but at the global level. Poor country is suffering much more from this the inequality. So I think it's really time for global community to address this issue collectively, so that we really have to support countries with low income levels to be able to provide much better connectivity devices, platforms, and softwares for the students' online learning during the outbreak of coronavirus pandemic, and maybe this will come again and again, right? So we really have to think about how to guarantee equal opportunity, especially in online learning.
Yeah, like baseline resilience planning could be dealing with those network devices, platforms, and content. We have a list. Yeah. Let's get to it. Okay, we're down to 5 minutes. I want to ask one quick fire round. Each of you, very short answers, please. One thing you knew but now know more clearly, or you didn't know and you know now, and one thing you're going to do differently as a leader as a result of what you've learned from this. Ian, you have to go first because I know you.
One thing I'll do differently as a leader, I will utilize the new trust that we have to the full.
And one thing that you know now that you didn't know before, or you know more clearly?
How wonderful, what wonderful human beings teachers are.
Fantastic. Erika, can I go to you?
Sure. Well, I think the biggest thing that has stood out has been the strength of the school community. I knew that, but I don't think I knew it clearly, because when you're tested across time and distance, you see the personalities, you see teachers teach and find new ways of teaching. And I'm looking forward to then seeing what can we build into the future, perhaps, even an online school for our district that could help supply the teachers for hard to staff classes, or make international education possible for students living in remote areas. I think there's more we can do with the model.
And one thing you'll do differently as a leader?
Probably, as I mentioned, continue to think forward and to think bigger in terms of these other models that we could consider that we haven't looked at before.
Sorry if I missed that. Okay, David, to you.
I guess in a pressure cooker for achievement, like my school is, just weighing in on how important human interaction is. I guess that's something I've learned, something I've always known, but somehow gets lost when everything's moving. And I guess as a leader, spend more time meeting with students and spend maybe a little bit less time meeting with adults. So, I think that would be great idea for me.
Well said.
Juho, can I ask you the same thing? What have you learned that you didn't know, and one thing you'll take forward in your thinking about teachers?
Yeah, that I really appreciate the great potential of teachers to respond to the unprecedented shock to education system. Teachers did heroic jobs in responding to this pandemic. And I really think that this crisis can be turned into an opportunity with enabling, when we can establish enabling ecosystem for teachers. How to mix online with offline learning.
Fantastic. Well, we have 2 minutes. So what I've heard from all of you is that we've all wanted to get out of the box. There's been a lot of constraints on people. Now that we're out of the box, that freedom is a little bit scary, and we want maybe to go back into a box, but we want that box to be different. Huge opportunities in this crisis for parents to appreciate what teachers do, but also to appreciate their children as learners and to team up and to be a bigger part of their children's education. From what they've seen and what they've learned. For teachers, mindset, they've got a huge opportunity with respect to the technology that they've now had to learn to use, closer relationships with their students, having seen so much about how they live and seen them through this crisis. Absolute sort of paramount importance of human connection, of being in the buildings together, being able to see your students, being able to see if they're okay, especially on equity issues. And I think this equity issue does overlie everything in terms of, we have seen so starkly these discrepancies. And I think Juho gave us a list of things we can think about in terms of sort of resilience planning on that front. But I'm sure we could come up with many more. So I would love to thank all of the panelists. They've been very open and very insightful. And I've really enjoyed learning from and talking to and reflecting with all of you. And to everybody who listened, thank you very much. We liked having you here.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and thank you, David, Ian, Juho, Erika. Really appreciate all of your reflections and your openness, your willingness to be so kind of unbuttoned with us about what's been happening in your school, what's worked and what hasn't, and how you're thinking about going forward. I want to say that I'm so sorry we didn't get to more of these questions, because the high quality of what our speakers has been saying is only actually matched by the quality of the questions that we've have had coming in. So thank you so much for that as well. And finally, I wanted to say Thank you to the Learnit team that I work with. You guys are amazing, and this has been such a great first foray into virtual events. And thank you to our colleagues from Bett who partnered with us on this. Thank you all, and have a good rest of your day.